All right. Good afternoon, Marylanders, and especially Americans. I understand there are some troubling times that everybody are going through, and gun sales are been going down a little bit, but they're still high. And I'm basically making this video to clarify generally what Maryland gun laws are. Now, few rules. I am not an attorney. I'm not a lawyer. I cannot give you legal advice. I will give you the sources of which I have or where I'm getting these sources from, but please do not take this as legal advice. Secondly, is understand is that I will try to keep this as formal as possible. But one of the things about Maryland law and dealing with Maryland law when it comes to gun laws and the right to self-defense is that a lot of it's also case law. So cops have a lot of leeway to do whatever they feel like they want to do, even if it is not compliant with Maryland law or federal law, or even the Constitution. Thirdly, is that I accept and I appreciate any other comments or feedback in the comment section below, or share, like, subscribe, whatever. But definitely any feedback to clarify if I may have misinterpreted anything or have gotten something wrong, because I'm not perfect and it is very difficult, I would say, trying to find all of the Maryland gun laws and in one part. So one of the main few places I will show you my sources is Guns to Carry is a good site to get the laws from. USCCA, codes.findlaw.com. This will definitely give you the breakdown of pretty much all the laws, but it's still buried in there when it comes to certain localities that put restrictions. And then you will have handgunlaws.us. Now, to understand how Maryland laws referring to guns mainly work is that there are two major types of weapons, but I break it down to three. There are regulated weapons, there are non-regulated weapons or firearms, and then there are prohibited firearms. Now, your regulated ones are going to be your handguns, any type of what Maryland considers an assault weapon that was grandfathered in, and also 80% lower. No, not 80%, but finished lowers. Your unregulated ones are going to be your long guns or your shotguns, any type of rifle that does not fall under Maryland's assault weapon category. And then prohibited is going to be your assault weapons. So SBRs are pretty much all but illegal, but in the state of Maryland, but anything that's assault weapon that did not fall under the grandfather clause. Now I'm going to break that down and start with handguns first. And first thing is that if you are a Maryland resident, you come to find out, if you're trying to panic buy, or you think you might need some defense for your house, is that you're not going to just be able to go into a store and purchase a handgun just with through a simple NICS check and a few other paperwork. You're going to have to get an HQL first. And I can make a separate video on the HQL process. I made a separate video on getting the wear and carry, but you have to have that HQL, and that handgun qualification license. It does not prohibit you from possessing a pistol. So if you have grandfathered in before the 2013 Hughes weapons ban, or whatever they call it, you can still possess that. It prohibits you from buying, selling, transferring, loaning, and maybe even renting a handgun. And it also prevents the seller from selling one to you without an HQL. Once you have that HQL, you have to go through all the paperwork. You have to put out your your whatever form, the 410 or whatever form that is, the standard form for the background check. You pay your $10 or $30 to the state police for them to conduct the background check. Then you also have to do something called a 77R form, which is basically done through the Maryland State Police website, and you have to put basically restating the information. And there's a 7-day waiting period on all regulated firearms or firearm parts. That includes if you want to buy a finished lower. And I will go into that in the long gun section, but that's um, just go back to handguns. So if you have the handgun, You have to realize with Maryland is that we are a may issue state, which means that have they do not have you will not be able to that permit that HQL does not give you the permit to carry. That permit to carry is a separate permit, and you have to get it based off of a good need or a justifiable need standard. But in Maryland, we call it good and substantial reason. And basically, unless you're a business owner, you're rich or powerful or police officer, you're not going to be able to get that permit, at least in an unrestricted status. And then if you get a restricted one, they can restrict the time of day where you take it at. And like I said, I would try to keep this as formal as possible, but you'll kind of see the way the Maryland gun laws work, even on the Maryland State Police website, is that they basically say in order for you to legally carry, you have to have the Maryland wear and carry permit. Because of these strict laws, we do not honor we do not reciprocate with any other state in in the nation. And to make clear is that Maryland has security. They have cameras around, the same cameras that you see on traffic lights can read your license plate. And if you have permits, especially from places like Virginia, or I would say definitely, so the way it works is Illinois does not have any reciprocity, but they allow non-residents from 5 or 6 different states in order to get their permit. And I believe it's because they give them real-time tracking of their permit system. And I know Virginia is one of them. So if you are a non-resident that drives through Maryland, they will most likely know that you have a CCW. And there have been reports of cops harassing people saying, "Where's the gun? Where's the gun?" They will flag you down without probable cause just for having a non-resident permit, even if you have a Maryland wear and carry. But they haven't been as hostile as what they used to be on that. Now, moving on, handguns are also we also have a handgun roster, so you cannot purchase handguns that are off the roster. It has to be approved by the Maryland State Police. It is not violent like the California roster, but I believe the legislators put that roster on place in order to get the roster on the books, and then they can upgrade from there if they show wish. Um, if you do not have a permit to carry, there are only limited instances where you may be able to carry a handgun, not transport, under the state's blessing. So stuff like dog shows, like if you're training your dog, you can uh, carry a handgun. It's like limited events. I think it's maybe even trapping, but there are limited exceptions. But generally, virtually nobody is able to carry in the state of Maryland. As far as transporting, the best thing you want to do is you want to have and look on the Maryland State Police website for interstate transportation, which means that you're driving through Maryland. You want to have the handgun or regulated firearm locked, unloaded, and in the back of the vehicle where you cannot reach it. Ammunition separate. You can have your magazines loaded if you want to, per the Attorney General's opinion, but that's basically how it goes. And also, like the New York City restrictions, is that it has to be direct, and they don't say that in the law system. But I have heard. I had a friend that told me a story of one of his friends got arrested a few years ago, and basically his blood sugar was running low. He had to stop to get something to eat, and I think his car was similar to somebody else's, and it was a new car, so his car ended up getting moved or something like that. So he had to report it to the police. And long story short, he got arrested, and they said that he abandoned his car, basically. So even though it doesn't say that it has to be direct, they say there's only a few places you can take your handgun to, locked and unloaded, to like a gunsmith, to a second home. Basically, the basics. You can't stop really to get a bite to eat. You're going to be under the mercy of the police. So that's pretty much everything for handguns. It's pretty much carry is prohibited unless by a permit. And the only exception for reciprocity, I would say, is armored cars if you're on duty, because the state can't mess with their money interest. That's just one thing thing about the state. If it comes down to money, they will allow it. Okay, now moving on to long guns. Long guns generally do not have the same prohibitions or restrictions as handguns. Handguns are the main ones that have restrictions, so I know a lot of people that have panic bought or bought new firearms through this crisis. Unless they have their HQL, a lot of them are buying shotguns and rifles. And the first thing is that you don't. All you have to do is go through a simple background check, and then you can walk out the same day because it's a non-regulated firearm. As far as carrying, yes, you may carry a rifle or a shotgun as long as this is not a regulated weapon like a assault weapon, as like the Maryland state likes to call it. You can carry it how you see fit. You carry on your back, a scabbard blade. You can carry it in your car, even though I've been trying to find up and down where it says you cannot have a firearm loaded in your car. There's no restriction on that, because the same thing is that there's restrictions on handguns. This is what a lot of Maryland state law is built around, the restriction on handguns, and they'll dare you to carry a long gun. But I will go into that later, how they get around that. But there are very little restrictions. And to cover magazines, so the way magazines work in the state of Maryland is that Maryland prohibits the transfer, the buying, the selling, the loaning, or renting of what they consider high capacity magazines. In actuality, they're standard capacity magazines. But long time ago, or a while ago, basically the Fourth Circuit or a federal judge blocked it. So they blocked it partially, where you can still possess them, but in order to be able to possess them, you would have to go out of state. So if you go to Pennsylvania, Delaware, anywhere else, if you're coming from out of the state, you may buy them and bring them back into the state of Maryland. Now, what I'm not sure about is when I go into the next category, what Maryland considers an assault weapon, I'm not sure if they repealed that portion, because part of what an assault weapon is it's a detachable weapon that holds over 10 rounds. So we're going to go into it a little bit. So if assault weapons, pretty much for shotguns, is as long as it doesn't have a rotating cylinder, barrel, or something like that, it's not prohibited. Now, as far as assault weapons go, is that Maryland has a general ban on basically the common use arms, so such as any variant of the AK-47 is going to be banned, and they have an extensive list. I will scroll down to see, let you know if they have anything that's of interest to you. I'll go through that for a second, and then I'll explain. Okay, you can pause that and go back. Assault weapon means an assault long gun, an assault pistol, or copycat weapon. Now, we can have AR-15s in here, but we just can't have the standard Armalite version. It has to, I guess we get away with it by, like, we have the H-bar or something like the heavy barrel. So, but we are able to have AR-15s and AR-10 pistols here. It's just the original version of it for some reason. Now, going to here are the what constitutes as an assault weapon in the state of Maryland. A copycat weapon, a semi-automatic center fire rifle that can accept a detachable magazine that has any two of the following: a folding stock, a grenade launcher or flare launcher, or a flash suppressor. A semi-automatic center fire rifle that has a fixed magazine with the capacity to accept more than 10 rounds. So like I said, you can also you can possess larger than 10 round magazines. But I'm not sure if you have it in the firearm, did they remove that clause for the considered an assault weapon? Because yes, you can possess them, you can actually use them, but the thing is that if you do a combination of such, it might have, it might be considered as an assault weapon. I'm not exactly sure just yet. The main one that you want to look at is this overall length, less than 29 inches. So that is the main thing. So you cannot own it. Basically, you can't really own an SBR here in Maryland, and SBR is a lot less, like it's cheaper. I mean, you can have the barrel short and then pay your tax tab, but it'd be useless because you'll have to have some type of long stock that make it more than 29 inches. Now, the easier way to not deal with that is if you build yourself a pistol, an AR pistol. And the main thing is that it has to have a pistol brace, and you have to follow federal guidelines as far as whether you can occasionally shoulder it or whatnot. And so the way Maryland does that is that you have your you can if you purchase a finished lower in the state of Maryland, it will basically be treated as a regulated firearm. You do not need an HQL to purchase a finished lower, but you will have to go through the 77R process and the 7-day waiting period. The only way to be able to circumvent that is if you build your own lower. So if you have an 80% lower, you can purchase that, no background check needed, or if you just mail one out yourself, that is totally legal in the state of Maryland. And there are a bunch of more rules, but basically these are what assault weapons basically mean. And anything, there is a grandfather clause, which is pretty much over as of 2020. That was way long ago, probably about back before 2013. But as of 2020, if you have one of those, what they consider an assault weapon, then then it's basically prohibited. Now, let me go to the self-defense portion, because what, God forbid, what if you happen to have to use this? Now, also let me go back to long guns and vehicles before I forget this. Um, this handgun laws.us basically covers this. It confirmed, because I've been looking around. Maryland statute has many laws on covering the transportation of handguns, but few about transporting long guns. As long as they're not regulated firearms, such as assault weapons or machine guns. Yes, machine guns are legal in Maryland, but you have to register them every year, and it's just a pain. Um, but basically, you can open carry a rifle or a shotgun in your car, so as long as it's not considered a regulated firearm under the state of Maryland. And yes, your AR-10 pistol, since it is a pistol, and it will be registered as such, as considered as a regulated firearm as well, and that would fall under your wear and carry, your May issue badge. Now let's go to self-defense to be able to understand. Now, here's where it gets a little bit iffy. Maryland has a castle doctrine, but it is a very weak one. And you can't really find too many laws talking about whether Maryland, whether you have a right to self-defense if somebody tries to shoot you. So because I'm gonna be honest with you, the way Maryland works is that you have no right to life here. I will give you three sources. One source is going to be from USCCA. Second source is going to be from Handgun Laws, and the third source is going to be from what I learned when I went through my firearms training course. Okay, so let's see. What Maryland says is that they basically follow the duty to retreat. You can find this all on the thing. Even the castle doctrine is pretty weak here in the state. It's not like one of your states like Ohio where somebody can break in. They want to see you run away and cower into your little closet or so before you're able to use deadly force in order to defend life and health. And basically, you're at the will of the judge. But I'm saying castle doctrine, though, depending on where you're at, it applies in the home, but there is duty to retreat outside. At least that's what they say. Now, going to handgunlaws.us, because that really doesn't have any source. See if I can find this. It's the wrong page. All right. Deadly force laws. Maryland self-defense laws are almost based upon case law, not statute. And yes, you can't really find hardly anything that talks about the right to self-defense in the state of Maryland, because it's really, you just don't have it. Now, to you can read this all here. I'll scroll down while I talk about my experience. The way it works in the state of Maryland, at least this is what I was told by my firearms instructor, is that he didn't say any of this stuff. He said you have to have a good moral compass. And I was thinking about that at first. I was like, huh, good moral compass. But basically, long story short, is that you're at the judge's mercy. You have to prove that you wasn't look out to try to hurt the person, and there's going to be situations where you get screwed over. Even if you were trying to get away, they were still prosecutor might still try to come after you. That's just how the state of Maryland works. Like I said, is that I'm trying to keep this formal, but the way the laws and the statute works is that it actually gives more protection to the criminal and the cops. That's really the only people that carry in the state. Sometimes you can't tell the difference between both of them depending on what is going on, especially with the recent raids on with red flag laws, and that's what I'm going to get into next. So, like I said, open carrying rifles and shotguns outside is legal as long as they are not regulated firearms. But what if you do something that the state of Maryland doesn't like? Well, slap it on red flag law. And the way red flags laws have been working recently is that I will put this down here. Let's see, red flag. All right. A variety of people, including family members, cohabitants, medical professionals, law enforcement, are allowed to petition for an order to surrender to law enforcement authorities any firearms or ammunition within a respondent's possession and prohibit the respondent from purchasing or possessing any firearms or ammunition during the duration or interim or final extreme risk protection order. Now, from what I've heard from somebody is that in addition to screwing you over and taking your stuff, they will also make you pay $1,000, maybe even more, in order to get a mental evaluation. Of course, the state isn't going to do that. They want you to prove that that you're not going to do something, even though you haven't done anything yet. And they have been using these red flag orders in combination with no knock warrants. So they've been raiding people's houses. I want to say a guy named Duncan was recently shot and killed from a red flag order. And it gets pretty scary, to be honest with you. But you have to realize this is pretty much Maryland's gun laws for you. If you have any comments or questions in the comment section, please feel free to ask or definitely correct me on anything if I'm wrong here. But I haven't seen anybody else put any other videos up on the overview of Maryland gun laws. Definitely stay safe out there, y'all, and peace and blessings to all y'all.